Presenter is Nina Obuljen, who will talk about the UNESCO Convention that without doubt, is probably the main international instrument in the field of culture of the past 10 years. And now that has concluded the 10 years, it's also the time to do some analysis of the past and what has been achieved and what are the forms of reporting around this instrument. And Nina is a research fellow at the International Institute of IRMO in Zagreb. She's also a member of the UNESCO Expert Facility for the 2005 Diversity Convention, among very many other things that she's done in her professional and academic career. So please, 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to somehow to run through my notes and try to link my intervention both with a more focused context of this session, which started with the presentation of your project, which is the cultural rights and the right to culture debate, and also a little bit of the broader implementation of the convention, which links more with what we have done yesterday and earlier this morning in the context of the Compendium meeting. So as we have an open forum, and I guess not everybody is aware of the 2005 convention, I will just very briefly give a background. It is an instrument that resulted from a particular global movement that marked the end of 90s and beginning of the 2000s, where the governments and civil societies joined together to advocate for an instrument at that time called Convention on Cultural Diversity, and which was preceded with a number of declarations: UNESCO Declaration on Cultural Diversity, Council of Europe Declaration on Cultural Diversity, but also reflection on cultural diversity and also on the right to culture in other fora, including the UN system. And one of the options before the negotiations started, was the option to work on a new instrument on cultural rights. But then it was dropped. It would take us, of course, the entire session and even longer to analyze why it was the case. But I wanted to mention it because the idea of the right to culture is somehow built in this instrument, even though if it is not one of the explicit goals, and the instrument cannot be regarded as an instrument aimed at ensuring or providing cultural rights as such. What were the expectations from the convention? At the time, there was a lot of discussion around culture and trade, the position of culture, goods and services in the context of international trade. So definitely this was one of the expectations. Because of development, especially in other sectors, one of the expectations was to adopt an instrument that would guarantee the sovereign right of states to adopt cultural policies or policies for culture, Ritva, with the aim to ensure that because of this shrinking space for the intervention of the field of in the field of culture, to preserve the ability of the governments to intervene. Of course, coming to what you have said, it has to be, there was a concern right from the beginning that advocating for sovereign right of states to adopt cultural policies can sometimes lead to misuse and justifying certain activities or policies that would go contrary to the expectations with regard to the human rights and everything. So this was present in the debates, yet it is a convention that guarantees the right of states and governments to implement policies in order to protect and promote the diversity of cultural expressions. Another aim was to strengthen the work when it comes to culture and development and international cooperation in the field of culture. I'm now talking about the expectations, which was very much developed during the negotiations, this whole segment of the convention that refers to culture and development. And what was also very present in the initial reflections and somehow found its way through the text was the whole issue around the status of the artist, which is again very directly linked with everything that we have been speaking about when we talk about right to culture, especially in the sense of right to create and produce. What is important for this instrument is it is a legally binding instrument, but with very few binding and obligatory clauses which really oblige countries to do something. So it is a lot of countries can do this and that. And in that context, a soft monitoring system that is being put in place to see how it works is actually something that is going to show in the years to come how successful we have been in implementing this instrument. What is very important, as it is a legal instrument, so a legally binding, a law that countries agreed to accept, is to remind of some key principles, which is the equitable access, openness and balance in the flow of cultural goods and services, as well as the free movement of artists and culture professionals, which has really a lot to do also with the whole concept of rights, both when it comes to right to create, but also to right to enjoy. Recognition of complementary economic and cultural aspects of development in general, but this complementarity between economic and cultural aspects is very important because very often we see the, I shouldn't use the word infringement, but let's say of the diversity, the lack of diversity because of the choices that are being made through different gatekeepers, and also respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms of expression, information and communication as a prerequisite for the creation, distribution and enjoyment of diverse cultural expressions. This is a little bit the context in which this whole initiative has developed and the whole instrument has been drafted. So what have we at the end achieved in terms of a convention as a legal text? It is a new definition adopted at the global level of cultural policies, again referring to what we have discussed in the content of Compendium, where the cultural policies are defined as all policies having impact on culture, not only cultural policies as such, the old understanding. The way it is organized in the convention is around the cultural value chain, meaning creation, production, distribution, and participation. Anna-Mari, in her introductory notes, also made this link when you evoked different countries, what they are doing in the context of their different policies in favor of the promotion of cultural rights and freedom of expression. The international development is something which is very important. Introduction of preferential treatment in the field of culture, which is another complex topic. There is not time really now to discuss it. The introduction of the International Fund for Cultural Diversity, which is again an instrument that supports countries who want to develop their cultural policies or implement very concrete projects for the improvement of the diversity of cultural expressions. This instrument aimed at establishing clear relation between the legal aspects of culture and cultural policies and other international treaties. But this is probably one of the weakest provisions in terms of its implementation. And what is also very important for our forum is the introduction of a global system of monitoring of cultural policies, which is very much linked with what we have been doing in Europe through this project, through Compendium project for the past 20 years. What is also very important to say is that this instrument included a very specific article inviting countries and governments to work with the civil society in implementing the convention, which is really something quite unique when it comes to a legal instrument. So I will try now to briefly go through what has been achieved, because this is the title that I was given was the Cultural Diversity Convention on Trial. Not that I'm going to make any verdicts or decisions, but just to try to run quickly through what has been achieved. Of course, there is the work of the statutory bodies and Intergovernmental Committee, Conference of Parties. There is a huge amount of different research and reflection and comparative research on the implementation of the convention, which is creating a huge amount of very valuable information and new knowledge, which I think is one of the great achievements. For instance, even if the issue of cultural rights and freedom of expression, it's not an explicit goal, just while we are today talking, actually at 2 o'clock, started at UNESCO a parallel event during the General Conference on the freedom of expression in the context of the 2005 Convention. So there are a number of developments that are being developed around the Convention itself, which will probably push it also to monitor developments in those areas where there was not specific provision among the provisions of the Convention, but where there are these links. I think this is really something which is very much important. The quadriennial reports exercise, which is something very important for the work of the Compendium, but also the World CP initiatives. In a month's time, UNESCO will launch the first global monitoring report, which is a collection of articles of 12 chapters, where independent experts tried to assess, or they are trying to assess, the implementation of the convention based on these quadriennial reports. I have an insight in the publication because I was writing the chapter on cultural policies, but there is also, it is really interesting, there is a chapter on the freedom of expression, even if it is not, as I said, one of the provisions, obligatory provisions of the convention. It was obvious that there was a need to monitor what is happening on that front and to try to gather all this information about different policies that are being developed around the world. The global, so far through these quadriennial monitoring reports are really of very diverse quality. As you can imagine, methodologically, it is very difficult to build such a monitoring tool at the global level. But again, a much inspiration came from the work of the Compendium, and this is something that will be for sure developed in the years to come. There are many interesting assessments and innovative approaches to the development of cultural cooperation and reflection of what I mentioned earlier on the preferential treatment and the idea to introduce a concept that comes from the world of trade to foster international cooperation, both at individual levels and organizational and institutional levels, but also at the industry level. So this is another area in which the convention has been only 10 years old or young. And for an international instrument, it is really a very, very short period of time. So the results are yet to come. But by identifying these priority areas, the UNESCO and the member states who agree around these priority areas are illustrating in which directions they see that the future monitoring should go. The convention is also seen as a very important instrument for fostering international integration of culture in national development policies and strategies, something that is lacking not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries. There is a link between the work of the UNESCO and the UNDP. So the whole group of many activities happening on that front. A number of colleagues who are also present here are involved in the UNESCO Expert Facility Program, which is another very important development linked with the convention, which is an attempt to assist countries to build their cultural systems, to work on their cultural policies, adopt national strategies, which is such a challenging task, especially in the context of shrinking budgets and very difficult situations where many countries are found in a situation that they have to argue for the support to culture while they can't provide some basic needs of their population. This expert facility was started, the project was started by the European Union as part of the culture and development policies of the EU, but it is interesting that it is now supported by the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, with explicit task, with one of the explicit demands being that all of these developments have to reflect improvements in the context of improved freedom of expression and right to culture policies. So again, we keep walking in this circle where we are touching different priorities in the field of culture and culture policies, and yet the freedom of expression, democracy, and the right to culture or cultural rights become somehow a tool and a goal at the same time, however you want to see it. I'm not going to talk much about the International Fund for Cultural Diversity, as I think that I'm coming close to my 15 minutes. I would just like to conclude referring to the title. As I said, I didn't quite understand why should the Cultural Diversity Convention be on trial. Who came up with the title? But anyways, I think. If I would look at the expectations at the beginning and what has been achieved and what is being developed around the convention, I think that in some segments the convention has resulted with really exceptional results in just a 10 years period. And it does create a rather vague, but still it creates a legal basis for building international cooperation in terms of developing the culture and culture policies. In some segments where expectations were probably the highest, which were the links between the trade negotiations, global trade negotiations, or bilateral and regional trade negotiations and culture, it has been quite a failure, if not a complete failure. We see it today with the developments around the TTIP and TTP, but also at the European level, everything that is coming up with the digital single market and the fact that suddenly much of what we consider to be the field of culture is being dealt with on the level of technology and thinking mostly about platforms and not thinking at all in terms of creation, production, and again, distribution and the right to access and right to participate. So I think if there is a need, in particular in Europe, because we have somehow often been policy guinea pigs when it comes to revolutionary developments, that this convention should really be evoked in order to question the whole digital strategy and where the culture might end, because unless we act quickly, we might be found in a very peculiar situation in a few years from now. So this is my really very brief overview. As I'm getting older, I continue to be an optimist. And so I think much has been achieved, and I think that there is much work to be done in the years to come. And I hope that both groups or initiatives that have met here in Wroclaw the past 2 days. The Compendium Experts Network and the whole network around the cultural rights will find a way and reason to be involved in the implementation of this instrument. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.